G'day, bird nerds. Welcome to Friday. I'm Grant. I'm a bird nerd. The Bird Emergency is my creation, but I've teamed up every second Friday with Ricki Coughlan, ornithologist, artist, all-round expert on little brown birds. And we do the deep dive for bird watching. Hello, Ricki.
Hi, Grant. How are you doing?
Look, I'm doing great. And look, a couple of people were saying to me, "What are you doing a show on Good Friday for?" And I said, "Well, I think every good committed atheist needs to do something to take advantage of a fantastically wasted holiday." So there we are. So I'm sorry if that offends anyone, but hey, it's a free country, and I can choose not to believe whatever I choose not to believe, and hence it's just another work day. Let's say welcome Martin and Glenn, regular members of the Riot Squad. For those who don't know, the Riot Squad is the crew that turn up regularly to the live streams and participate. Ricki, you've just been to a birding hotspot that's only really a stone's throw, well, a long stone's throw from the city of Sydney. Tell us about it.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yes. Well, I've been up to the beautiful Capertree Valley, which is situated in the Blue Mountains, and it's kind of interesting because I live down in the Shire, down in Cronulla, and I work about halfway along that journey. So I work about an hour and a half's drive away from home anyway in Western Sydney at Sydney Zoo. When I'm not doing my bird watching tours and all of these things. And so, yeah, for me, it was kind of like, it was only like twice as far. Like it's a bit over 3 hours to drive from my place to Capertree Valley. It's situated north of Lithgow, so about halfway to Mudgee, for people who are familiar with the region. And it is, by various ways of measuring it, the world's second largest open valley behind the Grand Canyon. So this is it's a massive and beautiful place to go birding. And it is actually, to my surprise, it's listed in the top 50 birding hotspots in the world.
I wasn't aware of that until I looked it up. I knew it was a hotspot for Australia, and it's one of those places that people that birders always talk about getting to. It's a bit like, Little Desert and places like that. It might not be on your top 5, but it's sort of in your top 20 that you always want to get to. I didn't realize it was so massive.
Yes, it's quite a big valley. I'm not sure of all of the measurements or the proportions of it, but as you can see from some of these images, basically wherever you drive, you are surrounded by these beautiful high sandstone walls with beautiful forest all around the sides of it. And it's a lovely semi-rural atmosphere. So you're driving through a lot of small hobby farms, but you are also, I guess, a lot of them are still well planted. There's a couple of lovely rivers running through them, and these are all well vegetated. And it's along those rivers where I tend to find the region honeyeaters breeding at that time of years when you may find such a thing.
I'm just getting something ready to answer your question here. There we are. And look, for podcast listeners, this is a live stream that we turn into this is a podcast that has evolved from a live stream. So I'll put the photos up on the birdemergency.com post that accompanies the podcast, so you can see them yourself. But if you're just listening and you're not heading over to have a look at the images, and I hope that that has answered your question, Martin. Capertree, C-A-P.
No, Capertree. no R in the no tree.
What?
It's not a tree.
Right. Oh, have I got that wrong?
Ah,
There we go. Well, there we go. I'm always mucking things up. Let me fix that. Well, I didn't even notice that Google referred me. Uh, uh, it must have automatically corrected, and I didn't even notice.
yeah, you're not the only one who has called it the
There we
Capertree
go.
Valley in the past. Yeah, the
There we go.
Capertree
There we
Valley.
Capertree Valley.
Yeah.
Now, all of those photos, Ricki, and everything. I looked up all the Tourism New South Wales and the national parks and everything, the hotspot, um, all of those websites. It really reminded me of when you drive past the Warrumbungles. Those escarpments, those rugged escarpments, reminded me of so much of that central west of New South Wales.
Yeah, there's a bit of a mood of that. I think when you go to the Warrumbungles, it's different kind of country. You are starting to get into the west more. When you're in the Capertee, it's still very much east versus west, or east meets west, I should say.
Yeah, certainly the vegetation community is different. There's no. Well, tell us, are there any calitris, any cypress pine that you saw in Capertee?
Yeah, yes, you do get them. Same as you do because you get that right up through into the Pilliga, and of course it features fairly strongly in the Pilliga. But yeah, you get cypress through the Capertee, and it's quite that you've got quite a good box eucalypt variety in the valley, and yeah, what can I say? It is it's a place that there's discrete patches when you go to many of these kind of areas, because it's large enough that you can go to discrete patches where different species of trees are going to predominate. And there you get a different assemblage of birds. So you can kind of like move around the Capertee and go for a particular, group of birds wherever, whichever you fancy at those spots.
Now you sent me a list of some of the highlights, and let's bring them up. Oh, hang on, we've got someone.
Can we consult my phone at this point?
Yeah, Martin, we'll probably talk a little bit more about that, but let's talk about some of the highlights. We're bringing up eBird because I love eBird. Thanks to Wilson and Merlin for getting it together. So you mentioned the hooded robin, and we've got a photo of the hooded robin up there. Tell us about your encounters with the hooded robin, and are you well familiar with the hooded robin before this trip?
Oh yeah, well, I've done a lot of birding up in this. I have been away from the Capertee Valley for about 10 years, or actually 12 years since I've been in the Capertee Valley. So it had been a long break, but prior to that, I'd been up in the Capertee Valley a lot, and I've done a lot of birding in Western New South Wales. So hooded robin is not unfamiliar to me, but you don't see it a whole lot on the coast and where I'm situated. But yeah, it is just such a stunning bird, and we had many beautiful encounters. And I know that going back into the past, you might get 2 hooded robins for a weekend of birding up there, maybe 3. But the abundance up there this weekend was just amazing. I was blown away. Everything was in huge numbers, and we can probably put this down. We've had a couple of really good years, but we had gorgeous hooded robin encounters up there, and we must have got. Let me see. We got around about 9 hooded robins. Could have been more. But just off the top of my head, I can think there was at least 9 encounters with hooded robins. And we got them on every day. The first day, just a brief glimpse, but that was, because we arrived up there. I took some birders up there, and we were all to meet at Friday afternoon or Friday evening. So I got up there about 2:00, did a bit of a recce, and during that recce, I got a hooded robin. And then on the next day, we just started getting them everywhere. So the first place we went to, and I probably should have put this on the pictures, we went to a place called Crown Station Road, which is one of the kind of like, if you're going birding in Capertree Valley, you go to Crown Station Road. And we were there actually on a turquoise parrot and plum-headed finch hunt. And but we just walked into a wall of abundance as we went along, and it was fantastic.
Were you encountering them solo, or were you seeing pairs? Like at this time of the year, what are they doing?
Yeah, well, we were still seeing them all in pairs. Practically every counter, it was a pair. So I'm not sure whether that's telling us that they had, they were right in the middle of breeding. I'm trying to think if we saw anything collecting nesting material, because I have some recollection that we did see some birds collecting nesting. We saw finches collecting nesting material, and I guess we can get onto those shortly. But the hooded robins, we didn't see any nesting activity, but we did see pairs and beautiful views.
And with the amount of birding that you've done in Western New South Wales, like in the drier parts of New South Wales, Ricki, what are the other sort of hotspots that or regular, reliable places that you've found where you can see the hooded robin?
The hooded robin. Let me cast my mind back. I've had a hooded robin. Actually, I've got hooded robin on the road from Warren to going up to Macquarie Marshes. I've had hooded robin there. I've had hooded robin out at Nyngan. I've had hooded robin back of Cobar. And now the name of the national park eludes me at the moment. I've had them out there. Nyngan. I've had them in. I think I have had them in the Warrumbungles.
Yeah, that's where I've seen them on. Just trying to think which road. Yeah, well, that I had to stop for a wee going through the Pilliga, and it was an exciting stop because I saw a hooded robin and the wild type of the Brachy's-comb multifida, which is called Pilliga posy, I think, which I knew from working in nurseries. And I thought, oh wow! So actually, I was more amazed by that than the hooded robin. But one of the best wee stops ever.
It's amazing what you see when you have a wee stop. It's amazing wee stops. Myself,
and I was taking one of those trips, one of those scenic routes, where I was going from. I can't even remember if I was driving from Canoundra to Dubbo, and I was just going totally off track. But I wanted to see as much of the Pilliga as I could, because I'd probably done that trip through the Pilliga on the highway to Dubbo probably 50 times, but I'd never seen anything that I considered interesting other than mulga parrots, and red rumps, but they were, you just saw red rumps a dime a dozen out there. So I thought, well, I'll go through some of the tracks rather than the roads. Back in the days when I had a Land Rover, and it was great. Yeah. But unfortunately, it's nothing. It's not the place it used to be, is it?
Well, nothing is the place it used to be.
Yeah.
If I go back to birding adventures in the 70s or the 80s or 90s, and
Yeah,
consider
this is
the world as it is now, it is it's the change has been vast. I mean, I went for a drive from Mildura right up into St George, basically in Queensland, following the Darling in the late 70s, and it was a full river in those days. Like it was a splendid, magnificent river, inland river, and just the cockatoos and the parrots and the finches and just everything, the pigeons. It was an amazing place to drive through. And now it's just a shadow of its former self. And
now it's just a series of puddles.
Yeah, well, Australia is a shadow of its former self in those respects. But you still can go and see that shadow of that glory too. And it's of course the hooded robin I've had in Queensland. I've got a funny feeling that I've had it up in Western Australia as well, and maybe even Northern Territory. I've got Central Australian tours. I think I've had it there. So it's a great bird. And I think it's a real birder's bird. When you see that, it's every birder enjoys something about the hooded robin. It's just such a clean, beautiful bird.
I love all of our robins, Australian robins, which aren't true robins. But what's different, apart from obviously the plumage? But how does a hooded robin behave differently to the other robins that you commonly encounter, Ricki?
Well, no, I was watching. I was down in Royal National Park this morning, which is in a tall, very very tall, wet sclerophyll forest that sort of moves through ecotones of this wet sclerophyll and warm temperate rainforest in a stunning river valley. And the canopy there had, I was encountering here and there rose robins. And I think that the difference is with a lot of these birds is where you see them feeding, because they seem to be more or less playing the same game. Whether if we're talking about, say, the petroicid robins, or your red-breasted ones, they are very similar in behaviour, I find at least, to the hooded robin, in that they're pretty much constantly on the move. Whereas you get your saltriid robins, which sort of like they sit in there and ambush predator. They'll sort of plunge down and grab something and pop back up.
When I had my little nursery, Ricki, it backed onto two reserves. One which was a state park, and one which was like a local government reserve for a tip. So I had a lot of bushland, and I'd created a little artificial creek with stones and whatnot. And I used to get all the local birds come in watering there. And I had a pair of flame robins, but a group of scarlet robins. I mean, I don't think they were a social group, but they were not the same birds that consistently came in. The flame robin was far more confiding and confident than the scarlet robins. The scarlet robins would and this is just my experience in that location, but over a couple of years, the scarlet robins would hang back. The flame robin was far more like the eastern yellow robin, but not as confiding and bold as the eastern yellow robin. But it would be curious if I was potting up or weeding, it would come and have a look at what I was doing. But the scarlet robin would be further back, or the scarlet robins would be further back on the fence. They'd come down for a drink when I'd sort of turn my back. They wouldn't, while I was watching. So, yeah.
That's a specific sort of set of behaviours that you're going to get in a discrete sort of patch of environment, I think. But it may carry over as well more broadly. But I don't think I've ever thought about, like, I can think of one time I was running a little brown birds workshop out at Castlereagh Reserve in Western Sydney, which is it's a gorgeous patch of basically reconditioned forest, if I can put it that way, out there in Western Sydney. And so I had up, when I do my little brown bird workshops, I have like these posters. These days it's the pull-up banners, but in those days it was these posters I sort of had hanging up in some kind of way that I'd put together using tripods to hold them up. But anyway, I'm standing there, and right next to a dead bush, and a red-capped robin landed right beside me. And it was like, oh, well, of course, that was the end of the tour. Gorgeous red-capped robin.
No one's interested in little brown birds when the black, white and red bird turns up.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was very gorgeous, and it was so confiding, and it just landed right there. And I go from looking one way at the signs to like, I heard something land, I looked, and then I just didn't look back at the signs, and everyone else was just looking at this bird. And and that was probably the most confiding of red-capped robins I've had, but I have found them to be pretty good in that respect.
I haven't had any close-up encounters with a red-capped robin. I've seen them from a distance, but I haven't been close enough for long enough to check them out in that way.
I've had lots of them in Central Australia. We had one when I was warden up there at Broome Bird Observatory, and only one. But I've had them on riding a snowboard very slowly through Thredbo. You come down off the hill at Thredbo on the main run, and you just slide along very slowly. It's almost flat, and you're just using a bit of momentum to just glide along slowly through this beautiful snow gum forest. And of course, in there you'll get your red-capped robins, and they just look stunning in that kind of environment.
They're a beautiful bird. Now we're going to move on. We're going to move on to another beautiful bird, Ricki. Another one of your highlights on this trip, the diamond firetail.
Yeah. Just before we hit the diamond firetail, I have to say one I left off the list was my favourite parrot, and that is the red-backed parrot. But we can bring that up after anyway. But I guess let's talk about the firetail, because this is a bird that's on everyone's hit list when they go up there. And usually I'll go up there and get 3 of them, 4 of them, but we got dozens up there this time. It was quite fantastic. And we went to the place where everyone knows pretty much that you should go to Glen Alice Church if you want to get your diamond firetails. And it being a Sunday, we figured it was appropriate to go to church on a Sunday and see what we were going to be rewarded with. And it was a fantastic place. We got a lot of black-faced wood swallows there. We got crested shrike-tits there. We got restless flycatchers there. We got double-bar finches there. We got red-browed finches, plenty of superb fairy wrens, spotted pardalotes. So we got quite a good list out of there. But the flame robins really featured, and we got half a dozen of them after about 20 minutes of birding, and then we got another half a dozen. And then I went down and had a look along the creek. I was actually chasing some grey-crowned babblers turned up, and they're kind of like, grey-crowned babblers were my favourite garden bird when I lived at Broome. And if anyone who's been to Broome Bird Observatory will know they're one of the local clowns that turn up there and do their happy families thing. And so I adore these birds. And so they turned up, and I'm chasing them along the river. And I looked down, and there was a dozen diamond firetails all lined up along this little sandbar on the side of the creek there, all having a drink. And I was just blown away by that. And the next day, we were fortunate enough to be invited onto a property there, and the birding is absolutely stunning. I've not seen many places where the birding has been better, actually, just the bush birding at the back of this farm property. where he had a dam, and there's a nice, Cocoa Creek was running through it. That's one of the prominent creeks there in the valley. And just fabulous. Here's the dam, which is kind of a little distorted because I used I did the panorama thing on the iPhone with this shot, but it was quite a substantial dam and great birding all around. So many white-browed babblers there too. But the point about that property was we got at least one, I think there might have been 2 diamond firetails building nests there. So, and this is like, this was on April 1, April 2. So, building nests at that point in time in the valley.
Very, very, very good. Listed as vulnerable now, the diamond firetail. Yes. Again, it's a lot of these birds that I'm thinking back to the 90s when I was driving around the country in a Land Rover. They weren't common, but it wasn't unusual to see them. But now they're a bird that people are targeting because they're not common. Now, I want to ask you about this particular tour in a second, Ricki, but I did have another question for robins, which made me think, because we're doing the birdwatching deep dive, and you mentioned rose robins. I want you to tell people, how can they reliably tell a rose and a pink robin apart?
Oh, well, I have seen in my life one pink robin. So I'm not an expert on that, but the rose robin is very much, it's rose. And I think I'm whipping my field guide up here, because if we look at the pink robin, and I need my glasses for this, we will see that the pink robin has like a fully pink belly as well as breast. And if we look at and can I hold this up so people? Yeah, if I hold that up so people can see, we've got our.
Sorry, I've gone to the photos on eBird.
Good stuff.
So there's Rose. There's the rose robin. And I'll just do just bear with me, and we'll change it over to the pink robin, and we'll see what we can tell apart. I've got to say, I've only been in there we go. The pink robin's far. It's far brighter, isn't it? It's more like a neon sign compared to the.
It's a very pretty pink. It's a very pretty little bird. And but I do know that even if you see the rose robin, you clap your eyes on that rose-coloured breast, and your eyes become so greedy to see more and more and more. And it's actually Castlereagh Reserve that I was talking about before, where I've gone up there once, and I was with a friend of mine who has been on the Bird Emergency before. Nick Bishop, who's a good birding buddy of mine, we were up there once. We got over a dozen of them there in a morning's birding, and it was just fantastic. But the pink robin, I think, is considered more of a prize than the rose robin.
I don't get that thing about being a prize. Other than grey falcon, I still talk about that all the time.
Well, great. Yeah, grey falcons is kind of funny. Again, when I was up in Broome, we had at least one grey falcon hanging around for some time. Mount Annan the other day for the winter. They'll be Glenn. I started getting rose robins in Royal National Park about 2, maybe 3 weeks ago. I started hearing their calls, so it's not surprising you're getting them around Mount Annan. And we're only getting the odd call a few weeks ago, so they should be coming in noticeable numbers now.
Yeah, so, for the podcast listeners, that was a comment from Glenn who works at the Mount Annan Botanic Garden. So the rose robins arrived the other day for the winter, and they'll be here all winter. What I'd like to know, Glenn, is do you get the pink robin as well? And do you get, I'm pretty sure, well, I know I've seen photos of the eastern yellow robin that you've taken up there, but do you also get the scarlet and the flame as well? Now, Ricki, let's talk about the rose robin arriving. Is it a migrant in the same way that currawongs are, in that they're sort of an altitudinal migrant?
Yes, it's an altitudinal migrant, and so it's interesting. Last year, the numbers were very, very small that I was getting of the rose robin, and I'm wondering if that was something to do with the fires that went right through the southern highlands and beyond. But this year, I'm already getting better indications that the numbers may be better.
Now, are pink robins also altitudinal migrants, or are they resident birds?
Well, we don't
get them. Or do they just go wherever they feel like it, free as the wind?
Free as the bird, yeah. Not sure in that respect, because we don't get them around Sydney. I would doubt you'd get them in Mount Annan. They're more, you'll start getting them if you get down towards Canberra and beyond. So yeah, they're not a Sydney bird. So yeah.
I don't know whether this is typical, but my experience in Gippsland with the flame and the scarlet, the flame robin was around most of the time. The scarlets I only really noticed as the weather. Actually, I don't even think it was always in summer. But I didn't see scarlets all year, so that's yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm consulting the Redfield guidance.
The Oracle.
Yes, and which the notes are, of course, are not as complete, but yeah, it's because it's not a bird I've worked with a lot or seen a lot of. I couldn't say with any authority whether it's an altitudinal migrant or not, but I'm guessing it may be.
There we are, and Glenn's clarified. Only the rose robin, the red cap, and the scarlets. Never seen a pink robin at Mount Allen. Eastern yellow robins are there all year. And, of course, when I said that Glenn works at the gardens, I mean he's there photographing as an authorised volunteer. He's not like Mr. Mount Annan. So just to be clear, don't go chasing Glenn up to get any favours, or can you get me a cutting, Glenn? None of that, thanks.
Because it's a good place. There was a great bird banding program out there for donkey's years, which I was fortunate to go and participate in for a while. But I'm not sure if that's still going on.
Maybe Glenn can tell us.
Maybe Glenn is going to tell us, yeah.
Now, another bird that you mentioned as a highlight, Ricki, and I want to talk about all of this group that you were mentioning, the grey-crowned babbler.
Oh my God, I love these birds.
All the babblers are super cool, and if you're listening from overseas, our babblers in Australia are not true babblers, but they're just as cool. Okay, there we are. So the bird banding is still running at Mount Allen. Maybe Glenn, if you can forward me maybe through an email or something, if there's ways for people to be involved in that, let me know and I'll link it and whatnot, because I'm sure people would love to do that. And here we go. Glenn's given us another piece of useful information. If you are wanting to go to Mount Annan Botanic Gardens, 192 species that have been ticked off in Mount Annan. So that would almost be a hotspot on its own now, wouldn't it, Ricki?
Yeah, it's a fabulous place. Like I say, yeah, I've been out there bird banding, and that was some years ago. That was 15 years ago. But yeah, it was great for birds then. I can't see why it wouldn't be getting better. Yeah, so I'm always thinking I should be going back down there. So maybe now's the time.
From a horticultural point of view, I think I went to. I can't remember if it was like 95 or 96, 7 when I was last in Mount Annan, or might have been a few years later. But now it would be a very like a mature horticultural collection, I would think, which would make it a terrific habitat for birds. Maybe Glenn can fill us in a bit more on that. I when I was there, you could tell that it was still a fairly new project, but yeah, great. Ricki, we've got the grey-crowned babbler up. You also mentioned the white-browed. Now, I'm going to throw another curly one at you in a minute because come on.
You're going to get me to do imitations of their calls.
No, we're not going to find a white-brown babbler. There we are. Here's the white-browed.
Yeah.
Now, they're quite, when you see them in a photo, they're quite easy to tell apart.
Yeah.
But when they're on the move, and I'm thinking from a casual observer, maybe they're moving through your garden. I always focus with the white-browed on the and also the white on the tail. But is that as pronounced on the grey-crowned babbler?
No, you definitely, when you see it flying, you definitely see more white in the tail of the white-browed babbler, and you get that very dark cap. The cap just it is. You can see it's almost like just a grey stripe on the cap of the grey crown. Whereas this guy, it's got quite that little chalky cap. They're a more compact bird, but you shouldn't really. Unless you can see both the birds on the same day, it doesn't help to say it's more compact. But I would say that in flight, you're going to see rufous under the wings of the grey-crowned babbler, and in flight with the white-browed babbler, you're going to see that white tail tip quite prominently. But yeah, and there you can see how that the grey crowns have that sort of almost like a little mohawky style grey crown.
Yeah, and much larger brows. The brow is far more of a feature. It's less distinct than the white-browed, but it's much thicker. And I mean, when you see them together, you can't really mistake them. I think, but when you see
them apart, it's a different thing. Yeah,
and especially if you're not familiar with them. But the white-browed, and the white-browed certainly is less bold in its coloration too. I think when you
you think it's more. The impression is more of a darker bird.
Yeah,
and a dark sort of eye stripe, and and it might be just me and my personal experiences, but I usually see larger numbers of white-browed babblers together than grey-crowned babblers. But that could just, what I just, my story.
Yeah, I think.
But you can see that cap. I just go for the cap.
I'm just going to throw another one up too because someone.
You're going to throw up the halls babbler. Yeah.
I am because somebody was telling me they were seeing halls. Yeah, and they were definitely right. Looking at the photos they sent me, I hadn't got back to them and talked about it yet. But yeah, the halls has got that really pronounced white throat. Um, and have we got a front on picture here? If we can see a front on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good shot.
Large
The
bib.
Yeah,
Mm.
and that very clear delineation between uh, the lower breast or the underparts and uh, the white throat.
Right.
Um, yeah, they're a stunning bird. The Hall's babbler too. So uh,
I think all the babblers are things of beauty, and I haven't seen a lot of chestnut crown babbler, and I'm going to embark on a journey across the south of Australia in hopefully September, and where I'll get a lot more of these guys because yeah, they're all quite a stunning creature, and yeah, certainly yeah, the Hall's babbler, yeah, you can see that bib. You know, that white bib is much more pronounced. It doesn't sort of go on down into the belly area.
yeah, no, it's very well. It's far more clearly defined than in the other two
Mm.
species.
And
Now,
great. Mm.
now
All
Glenn has updated us about the horticultural plantings at Mount Annan. So when you're touring around, always check out your local botanic garden. Like if you're going through a new town and you've got time, if you're going to the bakery or something to pick up a pie, don't eat it in the car park. Drive out uh, to the botanic garden and have a walk around. You will see interesting birds for sure. Now, Glenn tells us that there's 4,000 individual species at Mount Annan. Uh, a lot is now mature, and some of the areas are protected as part of the Cumberland Plain woodland. So,
yeah, which is a
excellent.
fantastic contribution to keeping those together. And I notice you're clearing the olive. Mm.
Yeah. So, yeah, habitat rehabilitation.
Yeah.
So that's good.
So
Bio,
we feed African olive to the giraffes,
yeah.
and
Uh,
because they love it, and
And that's
that's it.
biodiversity net gain, right, Ricki?
Well, yeah, something like that.
Mm.
But yeah, on the matter of botanical gardens, uh, yeah, even if you go to Central Australia, everyone knows, you know, when you arrive at Alice Springs, you go to the Olive Pink Botanical Gardens, and the birding there is absolutely fantastic. In fact, they've had there on at least one occasion outbreaks of grey honeyeaters. So they've had quite an influx of tickers to see them.
Yeah. Um, I'm I'm going to make it my mission maybe next year to go on the trail of the Australian honeyeaters because there's so few that I have confidently ID'd. Honeyeaters are one of those ones where I love honeyeaters. I love watching them, but I just like to go. Oh yes, that's one of that group. If I'm not that familiar with them, um, I think that was just because I haven't been a fanatic. But yeah,
Well, it
Martin
is.
makes a good point here too, Ricki. Just before we go on, that I would certainly agree that in some parts of the country, the grey crowned babbler are very, very adaptable to be living in the gardens and the streetscapes rather than the fringes. They're coming into town. Um,
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
What? But
they get
white browd on the Mornington Peninsula, where I grew up, we had white browd um, living in sort of remnant patches of bush on farms. I often saw them. We only had white browd, so yeah, I guess they're. Would you concur, Ricky? Would you call the white browd more a farmland than an urban bird, or a
Oh yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well, it's because you don't get babblers on the east coast, beyond the ranges. But or at least I've never even heard of a babbler being, on
well,
east of the divide. But um,
certainly on the Mornington Peninsula in Balnarring, Muradoc, that strip.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
when I was,
yeah,
and
different story.
I'm
Yeah.
talking the seventies,
Mm,
and up to maybe 1980. That's the last
mhm.
time that I was hanging around on this particular property. You used to see them, yeah, frequently, and some of your other highlights are also there, like the white-browed tree creeper and spotted and striated pardalotes, which I think we'll get to. But
Yeah.
but
Well, on the farm property we went to where there were white-browed babblers,
mm,
that sort of has all of those patches of the remnant
mm,
bush through them, and there was we probably encountered three family groups of babblers as we walked around there, and uh, yeah, and no doubt there would be more because it was quite an extensive property. But yeah, so I can't speak to whether they're an urban or a farm bird because I've only seen them in sort of like that farmed country or
yeah,
along roadsides and things like that.
I always consider it a highlight when I see birds that that I don't see in my urban environment here, where I am in the northwestern side of Melbourne now. Whenever I see some new bird in a street, I'm I'm always fired up. I love to see it, and of course, being a plant nerd as well, I love seeing the interactions with whatever the vegetation is, the dominant vegetation is in the gardens or the streetscapes, and the public plantings. But that's just me. Now, Ricky, this one I'm bringing up. I want you to tell us about the speckled warbler.
What a bird. Okay, so this bird is listed as threatened in New South Wales because it is a bird that seems to be reliant upon and associated with fallen bark and wood that remains on the ground. So on places where wood isn't being taken to clear farms or for firewood where it is left, and these birds seem to be associated with that, a little like southern whiteface can be in those semi-rural environments. But the speckled warbler, it's a member of course, the Acanthizidae group and will thus be part also of the Little Brown Birds of the Sydney Region book when I have that completed. And so I was hoping to get this bird on the weekend, and on first day, on our first outing on Crown Station Road, we got a couple of them, and I was absolutely over the moon to see these birds again. Oh, look, there's that book. And so yeah, when we saw those, I was absolutely stoked, and I wasn't thinking we were going to get a lot more of them because I've never had more than just a couple in the Capertree Valley. But when we went to this farm, there were, I think the count was 13 of them that we got on the property there, which makes it a property of extraordinary value. Just for that reason alone, I nearly trod on one. They were that common.
Now, tell me, Ricky, is the speckled warbler likely to be found in those intergrade or edge areas where habitat changes,
So,
uh,
like in various ecotones or things.
yeah, like where that a bit of woodland is turning into an open bit of grazing land or remnant grassland?
Yeah, well, they tend to be in a more open forest. So they live in more open forest environments. So if you've got somewhere that, a forested environment that is opening up into that sort of grazing kind of area, those sort of spaces, yeah, you're likely to get them there. And we used to get them out of Castlereagh Reserve in Western Sydney. And I haven't had one there for 10 years. Apparently somebody got a photograph of one, and I think you can find it on eBird last year. But yeah, I haven't seen them despite, going up there fairly regularly and looking around and listening. But yeah, quite the amazing little bird. They actually have a really interesting, they're a cooperative breeder. But the interesting part about them, so it means you'll have your alpha male and the female bird, and you'll have a beta male turn up.
So Donald and Melania, and they've got Lindsay Graham or Ted Cruz helping them.
Yeah, except he doesn't do any help, but he does sneak in to cuckold the male.
Oh,
so he will generally not do a whole lot of assisting. And there's some pretty cool papers about this that I've encountered over the years. And yes, they're really interesting. Of course, they are one of those members of the acanthosid group that which, for those who don't know, we're talking about thornbills and gerygonies and white faces, and of course our little speckled warblers are part of this group as well. Now they will live in a fairly large group for most of the year, and then split up around breeding season to form, smaller little extended family groups. And like I say, you have the beta male hanging around there, just sowing his oats wherever he can.
So, tell me, Ricki, what's a tip or maybe a technique for finding or locating speckled warbler, because they're quite unobtrusive birds in my experience. You sort of I've only ever come across them really by accident, or I've been watching something else and I've seen some movement out the corner of my eye, and then I go, oh, there's a surprise. There's a nice surprise.
There's a bunch of them. Yeah. Well, this time of year, up in Capertree Valley, we were noticing there. Well, on the first day we got that pair, but my thought is that they were probably part of a larger group that we didn't see. But because later on, when we went to that other farm property and got quite a large number, we got like a couple of groups of 4 or 5 birds, and they're kind of like, for me, I don't go birding with the idea of a target bird. I say I'm going to go to a particular habitat because I want to see all the birds that you would regularly expect to see in this case, an open forest or open woodland, open temperate woodland. And so I'm going there and I'm looking for my robins, and I'm looking for little lorikeets, and I'm looking for the various honey eaters that you might expect, and I'm looking for buff-rump thornbills and striated thornbills, yellow thornbills, and speckled warblers and quail and those kind of things. So I'm going out there with that kind of hope in mind. So I'm always just keeping an eye on everything around me, and of course bird watching is bird listening. So there's a lot of that going on.
I'm going to just duck out of shot for a minute. Ricki, can you tell people what the whether there's a call or where they should be looking if they're trying to find the speckled warbler? And then I'll just be off shot for a minute and come back, and then I'll answer Martin's question here. And then I remembered the question that I had for you about your tour. I'll ask you about that in a minute. So
okay, all right.
So don't be alarmed, folks, when I disappear.
Good. Okay. Well, speckled warbler. In all my experiences, as I say, they are a bird that you go go into your sort of your open woodlands or on your edges of farms, and anywhere that's welcoming to birds, that has your sort of lots of fallen timber on the ground. And so if you're going over the ranges, the kind of birds that you're going to look for in those environments, and definitely that I target in those environments, are some of my favourites, like southern whiteface, buff-rumped thornbill, speckled warbler. All those birds birds of that acanthizid group that you tend to find on the ground. And so they've got quite a busy chattering call that's fairly easily distinguished. And I don't know if we can play that. Can you play the speckled warbler call by any chance?
I will in a moment. Martin, page 340 in the Australian Bird Guide.
Oh, right.
Martin couldn't find it, so let's. Why is that? This is. It's not going to let me play audio here. Oh, here we go.
Isn't it just a beautiful little call?
It is, isn't it? So
it's quite unmistakable.
And actually, Vicky Powies took that recording, 2010, in Lithgow.
Oh, right, okay. Well, Vicky's a big loiterer of the Capertree Valley, a fantastic birder. He's done a lot of bird recording. This is the kind of calls that we were getting.
There we go. So that will help. Good on you, Vicky. I love when people share their stuff so that people can learn. So that's great.
Yeah. Vicky makes pretty good movies for. I think she does it for BirdLife, Southern South Wales region, I think. But yes, she's taken some beautiful videos that you can see on YouTube as well.
Yeah. Now, now Murray on YouTube has a question, Ricki. Do small birds migrate in winter? And he's in Toongabbie. So for people who aren't familiar with Sydney, that's the Western Parramatta region in Sydney, in New South Wales. So we did talk earlier about altitudinal migrants. Do you want to talk a little bit more about Western Sydney, particularly, Ricki, and what might be moving in and out in the winter?
We're talking about little brown birds there. So in little brown birds, or your thornbill, your Rigony group, your what's called the acanthizids, and your scrub wrens and all of those birds, the only one in the Sydney region that's migratory is the white-throated whistler. Sorry, the white-throated Gerygony. And there is believed to be some seasonal movement amongst mangrove Gerygony as well. But so you get conflicting. My phone might be going to ring. Just a moment. We don't want that to happen. Good.
We don't.
Okay, there we are. It is silenced and out of the way. The olive, I said the white-throated whistler, and the mangrove Gerygony maybe a little, but certainly the white-throated whistler, which I keep going to call the olive whistler because its Latin name is Olivaceae, but it that's pretty much absent in the winter months. And one of the signs of spring is that you'll hear its beautiful little falling leaf call. So, no, they are not migratory, but because you've got great movements of all the blossom nomads, so you might get little lorikeets, or you might not, or you might get different kinds of honey eaters or lorikeets at different times of the year. And of course, silver eyes are always on their swirling migration.
and of course the robins that we were mentioning, the
Oh, yeah.
altitudinal migrants
Yeah.
with the robins. So yeah. Now, Ricki, you mentioned when you messaged me the notables from Capertree. You mentioned tree creepers.
Oh, yeah. Love them. What a
Now,
fantastic group of birds.
yeah. Now, do you have a favourite amongst the tree creepers?
Oh, black-tailed. But yeah, Northwest Australian black-tailed tree creeper is such a fave. But yeah, where I live, the common tree creeper is the white-throated and the now and again the red-browed, but both preferring different kinds of trees. But the brown tree creepers were great to see up there. We got them in good numbers, and they're interesting because they're one of the tree creepers. I think the rufous tree creeper is one that will spend a bit of time on the ground. Certainly the black-tailed does, and the brown tree creeper. Yeah, so you'll see them on the ground often, and then they scurry up into the trees. And just such a beaut bird. And that
So,
very
tell us what the different habitat is for the two you mentioned on this trip: the brown tree creeper and the white browed tree creeper. And for,
white-throated, yeah.
and,
Forgot what browed would be happy.
and if you're not familiar with tree creepers,
Oh,
what I always notice about them is the way that they're sort of the Australian version of a woodpecker, but they're not pecking wood. But what they do is cling on to the side of generally eucalypt trees, but they will use other suitable trees, but generally eucalypt trees, and they circle around and pop up. They sort of corkscrew their way up, searching for invertebrates in the crevices of the bark. But they're really engaging to watch.
I love it. Yeah. Well, they're very they generally what they're doing is they're very closely inspecting every little crevice and little flap of bark that they can get near. I strongly suspect they're doing a lot of listening as well as looking. And interesting, when we talk about the woodpeckers, they use their tails to rest on while they're pecking, whereas that's not the case with your tree creepers. And if you look at them, and you might be able to see from some of those images, if you can scroll through, you will see the rear toe or hallux.
That's what I wanted to show. The great
is very, very substantial, and they use that to prop on, and this is why they can only work their way up the tree. We saw one actually, and probably one of the first times I've seen it actually, break the rules and kind of work sort of around and almost down. But generally speaking, they will spiral or corkscrew their way up a tree. I often find, much to my annoyance, they spend more time on the other side of the tree. But they're such a great group of birds. And yeah, they're wonderful because they tell us a lot too in their sort of distribution in Australia about the biogeography of Australian birds. And if you have a look at I don't think you can see it. I'm holding the red book. I should have grabbed the.
Do you want me to talk about the blue book?
Well, if you have a look at the ranges of them, they speak to those discrete ranges where you find the birds are built around, and I'm really struggling to remember the name of the guy while I'm flicking through here, who
did the revision.
No, who actually, he did some research back in the 80s and marked out the distinctive biogeographical areas of Australia in which birds were more or less corralled by different large landmass features, whether it was opening of deserts or of water or ranges that created vicariance amongst birds, which led to the speciation and led to these distinct groups. And we see the same pattern of distribution among the Satellas as well. So the varied Satella groups are kind of align with the groups of tree creepers as well. And if we start to look through birds, we can see a bit of that. So they tell us that wonderful story about that the changing Australia over the last 40 or 50 million years, that the passerines became prominent, the songbirds became prominent and started their evolutionary journey across Australia that experienced a great many changes. So an absolutely fascinating story.
We might actually chase up that paper and then use it as a bit of a base for another conversation, Ricki, because I think that's
absolutely
and we might be able to frame it in terms of what's changed from when it was written and what the case is now. Because certainly when I'm looking at the distribution, particularly of tree creepers, I think there's more crossover, more integrating of the ranges than there was when I was a young birder.
Maybe, yeah. Like there's a couple of them. Certainly these sort of coastal and range ones do have some integrating, and you can see them side by side. Like we got plenty of brown and white-throated tree creepers. If we'd have gone up into some of the hills around Capertree, we would have got on more smooth-barked eucalypts, we would have got red-browed tree creepers.
Yeah.
But we didn't do that this time. But as the changes, especially since humans have arrived and altered the landscape, we've seen distribution of these birds change a little bit as we favoured some and been detrimental to others. But and you can also see that that how birds have started to move back in and blend as Australia, as our landscape evolves. And that's all reflected in the biogeography of Australian birds, which is one of the great stories in nature.
For sure. Now, there's been a couple of other questions that we might deal with from the Riot Squad. Now, Murray asked us about the small birds migrating in winter in Toongabbie. Now, we talked about a bunch of them, but he's concerned about the superb fairy wren and the red-browed finch. Are they migrating? Are they moving in winter?
No. A number of these sort of birds, like fairy wrens, are famously sedentary, and they are such poor little flyers that they will stay put, but they will change their behaviour according to seasons. And when they're in the middle of breeding, fairy wrens tend to go so quiet, and you can take people out. People will come from overseas on a birdwatching tour and want to see fairy wrens, and if they arrive on the wrong week, you can't show them fairy wrens.
No, that's right.
Yeah. So it's a little bit of a roll of the dice. But so when it comes to red-browed finches, they will move around a locality depending on the availability of seed, because sometimes they'll be going to seed in a little casuarina cones or pods. And other times I'll be going for grasses. Other times I'll be going for insects. So
and wattles, and even things like the fleshy fruits of rhagodias and the bursarias. So now here's a chance for me to do a bit of an ad for what I do every morning when I do my first seen and heard, #first seen and heard. And one of the reasons why I wanted to start doing it is so that I was noticing the birds that are around at a similar time each day in the same location, but then I could notice what they were doing compared or in conjunction with what the vegetation was doing, and whether there's lots of spider webs around, or just to really hone in on the holistic story of the neighborhood or the location, the patch, whatever you want to call it. So
well, I don't think you can understand birds unless you understand them within their environment. I work in a zoo where we meet animals on our terms, and you see the animal and you have an experience of the animal, but any species or any individual really only comes, its true meaning is only apparent when you see it in the context of the world where it lives and the changes that are going on in the environment around it. So it's great to go like on these journeys and go on a birding holiday and this kind of thing, and we all love to do it, but you can't beat going to your same patch several times a week for years and years and noting what's changing in the vegetation and what's changing in the avifauna, the bird life in that area, to get a much deeper understanding and contribute to the conversation about what is happening with our birds and the lives that they live.
And that's a really important point you made there when you talked about contributing to the conversation. If you are recording on eBird, Bird Data, Merlin, whatever it is that you're using around the world, that information that you are just casually contributing every day, maybe for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe it's a hour and a half walk that you do. If you are feeding in that data, there are people who will be making use of it. So it's a good thing to do. Now, Martin and Murray have another question, or a question and a comment. Let's stick with Murray again, because it's a follow on from the superb Fairy Wren and red-browed finch or conversation. He's noted, and he's out there checking off each day, a lot less small birds this year, 2 to 5 in numbers rather than 15 to 20. Now, I'm assuming, Murray, that you're talking about smaller numbers of records, or the family groups or the social groups that you're noticing of superb fairy wrens and red-browed finches. Just clarify for me that you're not talking about the number of species that you're seeing each time you're going out for a walk. I'm guessing that what you have put here is that you're seeing low numbers of those species where you were seeing in past years bigger groups. Now, Ricki, does that track with what you're seeing in your part of Sydney?
No, that's a little concerning, and that would depend on a number of things, like how suburban it is. Like maybe there's a growing cat population in the area, and that also depends on what just the two. So red-browed finch and superb fairy wren. Okay, so superb fairy wrens, I tend to notice it in the urban environment, and I was reading a really interesting paper that covered this. It was a paper that was covering the changes in the Kangaroo Island superb fairy wren, and talking about how this is a much larger fairy wren with some different habitats, because it's been separated from the mainland for 9,500 years at least. So 9.5 million years. Is it 9.5 million? It wouldn't be that, because they haven't been around that long. So it must be 9,500 years. And these birds are now bigger on this island than they are on the mainland. And they discuss some of the habitat needs. And there's something that I've noticed, that you tend to get them in urban gardens as long as there's a certain balance, or in any urban patch, as long as there's a certain balance of native plants still there. But they must have, that's interesting. So they tend to find too that a healthy supply of lantana doesn't go astray when it comes to getting these birds. Now,
But of course, down here where lantana is not a big problem, uh, it, it's other things that they need, but there's a density that they need. There's a sort of density of their refuge vegetation that they require, but they need open space as
because
well,
that's how
but
they
not
follow.
but
Mm,
not too but the open spaces can't be too big, because this was something Daryl Jones told us a long time ago when we talked about fragmented habitats. They don't
yeah.
like to fly very far.
Well,
So they
yeah, but
like um, little open spaces that are only, like backyard kind of size. They don't like.
oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Or they
yeah,
stick to the edge of the fields if they're near,
yeah,
if
yeah,
they've got, like I'm thinking around Cronulla here where I
yeah,
live, where we find them on the verges of the suburb and that, not around the beaches and that. But it is, some years ago I did put on a program over a couple of weekends called the Sydney Northern Beaches Great Fairy Wren Hunt. And so we got groups together and we went out and we mapped, we put on maps where we found families of variegated fairy wrens and superb fairy wrens. And people would write if they saw males or females and numbers of them. And each group that went out had someone who was well trained in how to identify these birds. And we did that. When I brought all of those data back in, I looked at it all and none of it made sense until I laid it on top of vegetation maps. And I went like, wow, okay. A lot of things we say about these birds weren't playing out there. What I was finding was, and a lot of people will agree with this, superb fairy wrens like disturbed habitat and more simple vegetation. It can be dense, it can be sparse, it can be whatever, but it tends to be more simple, more tending towards monocultural. And variegated fairy wrens like much more diversity in their vegetation. And again, it can be dense or sparse. But one thing for sure with superb fairy wrens, they like a little cleared area because they come out of their cover and they like to forage on the ground and take invertebrates out of the grass. And I'm sure we're going to do fairy wrens in the near future, and I will show a picture that I actually took at Mount Annan, where I'm holding a superb fairy wren, a variegated fairy wren. And when you see the morphology or the structure of their bills, it's quite telling that these birds live quite different lives if they use their bills in foraging, and that those bills, do they have something to do with breeding? And we do know that male and female superb fairy wrens have slightly different structures to their bills. The males have a longer, slimmer bill, and the females have a wider, slightly shorter bill. So there may be resource petitioning, or there may be that may be something to do with raising chicks.
Yes, we are certainly going to try and do an extravaganza. It may end up being a couple of episodes on fairy wrens.
How do you explain the lack of males? And I'm gathering, I've forgotten the name of the person who made
that's Murray, or I'll often refer to him as Stormy or H2 Rider. He's got a different handle for all the different all the different platforms. But
right, okay. So Murray, I'm gathering you're pretty good at IDing these birds, and that not seeing many males is interesting. And it's interesting. I think we might have covered this on the last episode when it comes to sex selection among female birds. That
we have to dive into in depth when we do the fairy wrens. So
this is something that is found right across birds, and we know that it happens in brown thornbills. I'm very strongly suspicious that it's happening in yellow-throated scrub wrens, and it probably is more widespread than we know. And that might just point to, without going too in depth, inexperienced males.
Yeah, look,
inexperienced male fathers.
Yeah, and and it's not unusual in certain creatures that if there has been a good year, or on the other hand, a bad year, that then they might regulate the sexes of the offspring, and fish do it.
It's more.
But
It's more. It is more expensive to raise a male bird
yeah, so
when it comes to these cooperative breeders.
so I think I think you've hit the nail on the head, Ricki. That I think if it was studied, if it was targeted for research more often, we would find out a lot more about how frequent it may be. Now, I want to move on to these questions from Martin. Now, Martin, I'm hopeless when I'm talking to so many people I forget. I can't remember you in Gladstone or the Sunshine Coast, but Martin's up north in Queensland. First question: is there a better time of the year for people, let's say in Queensland, southeast to central Queensland, to see robins, Australian robins? Is there a better time? And Martin's in Gladstone. Okay, I thought so, because you're near that magnificent Gladstone Botanic Gardens, which I love. Martin also mentioned that he's seeing a lot more Durigonys, fantails, monarchs. Now, I'd like to know, monarchs, whether that's the black-faced, or is it one of the others? Cisticolas, as you corrected me, didn't you, Ricki? Cisticolas, whereas I always grew up calling them cisticolas, redback fairy wrens and silver eyes, and that it's a good, been a good few years up there.
Well, it was if it was the black-faced monarchs, they did well with their breeding this year in Royal National Park, where I was spent most of my spring and summer birding. Fantails, I'm gathering he's talking about rufous fantails. They were only just finished breeding here in Sydney 2 or 3 weeks ago. So they raised several clutches this year. Redback fairy wrens, I dare say if Gladstone's been experiencing a lot of the rain that we've been getting, but yeah, they would have had a good year too. And cisticolas. Anyway, got spectacled and black-faced. Yeah, cool. Yeah, there you go. Wow. So spectacled don't generally come down much past the Hunter region here, so we don't tend to get them in Sydney. Someone reported one in Royal National Park, but this year, but that's probably about the second record in the park that I know of. So they're not a bird that you get down here.
I got very excited earlier this week, Ricki, because I saw a grey fantail for the first time since I've been living here in 2014. So I didn't see it in the park, half a block down, but it was hawking out of a. There's two neighbouring Grevillea robustas, one very mature, one maybe 5 to 10 years younger, on adjoining blocks, right? So there's a fence line going between them. And I saw in those two trees, I saw earlier in the year something which I thought was odd. I saw starlings had commandeered those trees. So they were driving the wattlebirds and the honey eaters away, and they were getting to the bases of the flowers. Now, I couldn't see from where I was whether there were insects, like maybe there were ants who were getting to the nectar, or and the starlings were eating the ants, or were they, maybe piercing, like some birds do, the base of the flowers, and drinking the nectar. I couldn't tell, but they had commandeered for about 2 weeks, a group of about 20 starlings, these 2 trees. Anyway, I'd been seeing a grey fantail, one, not a pair, and only a week or two before, there's a willy wagtail that is starting to hang around in the park. Now, for me, that's exciting because I just haven't been. They just aren't common here. It's like when I first moved in here, there was a grey butcherbird that I frequently heard. Now I've heard it twice in 2 years, and only once, and then it moves on.
Whereabouts are you? Around Footscray area?
I'm further out. I'm in St Albans, so I'm past Sunshine, but I'm on that same train line, and I'm in an area like where I am is right between the old part of the suburb, which is lots of fruit trees, lots of European, Greek, Italian style production kind of gardens, quite big things. But what's been changing, and then the edge, I live right on the edge of where it's all the councils have been amalgamated now, right? But where
as they do, yeah.
But the sort of the backside of where I live, nearly all the street trees, all the public plantings from the 80s and 90s and maybe late 70s were natives. So the street trees are eucalypts, callistemons, Hakelia, Melaleuca, was it Stiphyloides, snow in summer kind of thing. So we've got Euca. What am I saying? Callistemon saligna, Callistemon citrinus, Callistemon viminalis. There's a lot of native mature habitat.
Yeah.
But there's no understory, so we don't get fairy wrens, we don't get thornbills, we don't, and so there's lots of honeyeaters, lots of lorikeets, lots of wattle birds.
This is the story of all communities where they just stick one tree and 20 metres apart along a street and call that street planting, and they never think they should do a clump, understory, shrubs and things.
But the story is even more complex than that. In my area, every time a house is sold, and these are quite, large blocks, everything gets cleared, they get bulldozed, and then it becomes 2 or 3 townhouses. So every time someone sells their, a place that a family has lived for 30 years and built up a garden, it then gets raised to nothing. And that habitat for those birds is lost. And that, I think, is what's driving the change. The other thing that happened, the park that I always do my things in, and all the other parks around the area, probably about 2017, maybe 2016, when I moved in here in 2014, all of the sort of undergrowth, the messy undergrowth, all got removed. So it was obviously a decision by council, the Parks and Gardens managers. Maybe somebody complained about it being messy or said it was dangerous at night.
Gentrification, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So all of that stuff has been removed. So all of those birds that you used to see there are gone.
Yeah,
they're just simply gone.
So have all the insects, so have all the reptiles, so have all the frogs. They all vanish.
Yep, that's right.
I grew up with a street that didn't have curb and gutter in, not far from where I live now.
So and lots of masked lapwings.
We used to get green and golden bell frogs, which are now an endangered frog species. We used to regularly catch them in the gutter in front of our home. You could walk to the end of my street, and there was extensive area where you could still catch bearded dragons, and you could and there was so many finches and silver eyes and yellow thornbills, so many birds populating this open sort of very degraded scrubland, but then and behind like mangroves and salt marsh and mangroves, and all gone, replaced by light industrial playing fields, and of course the famous Shark Park, and where Cronulla Football Club, it's their home ground. And of course, now they've built this massive thing on top of, that area as well down there. There's been a lot of development there. So, yeah, all those birds are lost. And this is like happened in stages over a couple of generations. So, us who were kids in the 60s and early 70s, what we experienced as urban bushland was gone for kids of the late 70s through the 80s, 90s, and now it's all becoming housing. And then gradually, we sort of have this conveyor belt of change where things go to, playing fields, light industrial, now more condensed high-rise housing, and more people with fewer facilities, and nature, forget it. It becomes an afterthought.
And that's why when we can talk about, I mean, one of the things I'm going to be banging on about for the next couple of weeks is going to be this notion of biodiversity net gain, right? And when we're talking about nature-based solutions and how things get fudged, even in your street or in your neighbourhood, what's going on with urban development and the way that development happens, like when someone sells a property and buys it and then everything gets raised, that's a massive loss to local biodiversity. And maybe we're going to see some of these biodiversity credits be applied to developers who will find it more beneficial to totally scalp their developments, and then if they plant 2 kinds of trees and 3 kinds of grasses, that's a biodiversity net gain, and they'll be dipping into the public funds for something which is essentially useless, because once we've removed the habitat, no matter what we plant back there, because we don't re-establish the community. Well, this is what happens. We don't actually re-establish the community, but people who don't understand ecology are making the decisions. So if they put in 5 types of eucalypt, 3 wattles, a couple of callistemons, and maybe 15 types of ground cover, they're not re-establishing the community. And what will we find? We'll find noisy miners, rainbow lorikeets,
magpies, currawongs,
sulphur-crested cockatoos, little ravens. Now that's a biodiversity net gain if we talk about what it was like maybe 2 years before when they destroyed it.
Yeah.
But it's not a
long way away from when a lot of these places had, fairy wrens and scrub wrens and thornbills. Right. So, I walk a lot around here and think, wow, the times when these currawongs would have been flying between, through a forest and the stream that would have run down the hill. My suburb is called Woolaware, which means muddy trail in the language of the Dharawal people. Between 2 bodies of water. One is Botany Bay, let me get this right, Kamay, and the other one is we've got Port Hacking or Deban. So I live on basically a headland that sticks out. I'm on the narrow point of a headland that sticks out between these 2, large embayments, if you like, and so I get some very interesting bird life moving around, and I'm on a hilltop here, and I can just imagine the beautiful forest with all the Gymea lilies and angophoras and Sydney scribbly gums and the wonderful plants that would have existed here, and the bird life and the reptile life and the wallabies and the mammals and the phascogales, all of that gone. But this is a long way away from Capertree Valley.
And I just heard your currawong, I think, in the.
You just heard a currawong out back, yes.
Now I'm just noticing the time, so I'm going to limit us now, Ricki, to speaking about just 2 of my favourites. I'm leaving out all the ones that we spoke about in the scrub wren and thornbills episodes.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about striated pardalite and spotted pardalite.
Ah, right. Yeah, this was really interesting. We got stacks and stacks of spotted pardalites and some of the most splendid males I've ever seen. It seems every time I go to Capertree Valley, I see the most stunning male spotted pardalites, and it's like looking at a sky full of stars when you look at these, you know, these beautiful birds with those very dark grey, almost black wings, and of course their little cap, also beautifully spotted. But even this guy who's featuring in this shot does not have the beautiful beer bottle brown mantle or upper back that we see up there in Capertree Valley. And see, there's none are showing it here in these images. This little guy's getting close to what we were seeing. And but the spots were very prominent on the back. I mean, even I did manage to snap a shot of one of them myself, but it turned out to be a terrible image, and it's all I got because I was too busy actually watching with my binoculars and just savouring these stunning little birds. And they really were everywhere in huge numbers up there, and so we very much enjoyed that. And the reason why I wrote striated pardalite was because although I expected to get plenty of them, we only got one, and that one only made one call, and it sort of, that says to me that for some reason, because I do notice that spotted pardalites change their call over the year. They will go from 1 note, 2 note, 3 note to their classic little squeaky gate call or squeaky, wind vane call. But and I'm guessing striated pardalite do that too, because they were very quiet. And and as a result, we got one.
Well, I'm sure that lots and lots of people are familiar with the spotted pardalite call, but let's do it.
Yeah. It's windy, isn't it? I like this one because you can hear another one calling in the background.
Yeah. So, and the striated pardalite has some variation around its range. So,
that's a call I hear less of. That sounds.
Hear the butcher bird in the background?
Yeah, fabulous, huh?
That's the one that I used to hear. Long time since I've actually seen a striated pardalite.
Yeah. Now that I'm listening to all these different calls, I'm becoming confused with the ones in the various parts of the country I've lived in when you hear the different.
Well, remember, Ricki, I was a bird watching kid in the 70s, and we had the striated pardalite was actually a whole lot of different pardalites back then. So so we were memorizing different ones. But let's go back to the classic spotted pardalite.
Now, one you don't hear a lot of, and I'm going to do it because I'm a bit of a bird call person, but the one that goes.
But I'll just let this run through, and then we'll kill it. But you'll never guess who recorded that one.
Oh, well, it's Ricki Coughlan again, isn't it?
At Lithgow, yep. Yeah. So bringing us back to Capertree Valley, you see.
Yeah. But yeah, so you don't. And I didn't get a lot of it this summer, but it's the classic. and that the complete call. You'll often get
with the inflection at the end.
Yeah, because you get all kinds of different timings and notes and scale in it, and they're quite fascinating in the calendar of calls of spotted pardalotes. And I always fancy that the Dharawal people, that our local people had a handle on that as part of their understanding of the seasons.
Now, Murray's just noted that in his area, Toongabbie, no record for spotted or striated pardalote.
Too hard to get a tunnel going, and they can't always get into a tree. So I wondered whether, with the wet weather, and we did see one year where they didn't do too well, but last year, like this summer just gone, was an absolute bumper summer down here in the Shire for spotted pardalote. We got a lot. We got a lot in the summer of 2021 out in Western Sydney, where it was almost like it was plague proportions of spotted pardalotes.
And for people who aren't familiar, spotted pardalotes and striated pardalotes are birds that move through the canopy. I think that they will also be found in other places, but that's generally where you'll first notice them. But they breed in hollows, small hollows. They're small birds, so they need small, long hollows, but they'll also excavate in, creek banks, river banks, dam walls, wood piles, anywhere that they can find a suitable crack or crevice that has the depth, they'll get in there. So obviously, if those places were flooded or were wet, even if they weren't underwater, it's not suitable for them to breed. So they would have moved to somewhere else if they've survived at all. So.
Another time where you can see a difference in the occurrence of spotted pardalotes is when, because they're lurk feeders, so they feed on the little sugar tents that psyllid insects make, who are sucking sap out of leaves up in the canopy of eucalypts. And with the excess carbohydrate, they make a little sugary shell to live under. So the pardalote's a specialist on these, and you can see from its little bill how it's a little pecker of these crystal things. But so will parrots, so will the lorikeets, and so will a lot of honey eaters. So they will often bully and chase off pardalotes. Now, when they've just bred, and like they did in 2020, 2021, in that season, we were finding juvenile, so very young spotted pardalotes in huge numbers on the forest floor, because they were getting so bullied in the treetops because it was full of little lorikeets and fuscus honey eaters that they didn't have a chance. So they were down on the forest floor foraging, which is really interesting, taking insects. And there were a few adults with them as well. So we walked into a group of 20 or 30 at one point.
Yeah, that's not unusual to see them doing that in parklands here too, where particularly lorikeets and noisy miners, anywhere where the bell bird, the bell miner has moved in, they will drive the pardalotes out, and they're adaptable. And when I say drive the pardalotes out, I mean from their preferred habitat up in the canopy. So they will come down and they're opportunistic. They're good. Now, Murray, I want you to give us a bit more detail. We're going to discuss your question. I want you to tell us a bit more about size. What are the birds doing? Just a bit more detail so Ricki can have a crack at this, and this will round us off for this bird watching deep dive. We'll tackle Martin's question. Sorry, I think I said Martin. I think I said Murray, but Martin, we're going to tackle your question. Give us some more details while we're talking about it. Can I ask a question? Of course you can, Martin. That's what we're here for. And it's weighed on my mind for quite a long time. Well, we're here to take your worries away. There's no doubt about it. Martin walks a track and has seen groups, about 4 or 5 birds on the ground in thick understory. Now, definitely not a quail. Now, being Gladstone, What would be the first thing that comes to your mind? I'm I'm I want to know size, Martin, so that we can determine whether it's and how dense. Like, what other birds are you seeing in this location? Oh,
Yeah.
there's your noisy miner going off in the
Yeah.
background.
When you say understory, do you mean the ground cover or do you mean the shrub layer, which is an important thing? So you're talking about like the first, I don't know, half a meter of
Yeah, like
vegetation on the
up to
ground.
the knee, up to the hip. You know,
Yeah, or are you talking something that goes understory, which could be, well over the head of 3, 4, 5 meters high?
and and I like that they're little brown birds. So, yeah, I mean, are they scrub wren size? Are they thrush? Are they sort of blackbird size? Are they um, are they smaller? Do they appear smaller than a scrub wren? Are they, maybe chonky eastern yellow robin size? Just give us an idea. Well, if we know that they're definitely not quail, we're not going to say that they are anything like maybe the female king quail or brown
Yeah.
quails. Do they hop? Do they walk? These are the things we've got to notice. Now, for Gladstone, I'm not. I wouldn't have a stab other than thinking it might be one of the scrub wrens. But
Yeah, I've just gone through my field guide of the possibilities there, and if they're little birds bobbing around because when you say thick understory, it, like if it's shrub layer, that could be brown thornbills, or it could be one of the thornbills. But if we're talking about down right on the ground, he says on the ground in thick understory. I think he's talking there right there about brown white-browed scrub wrens.
So
4 or 5 birds. So he's in groups about 4 or 5. So the little happy families of white-browed scrub wrens get around in family groups of about 4 or 5 on the ground. They love the dense stuff because they get amongst it and they forage like little mice, crawling around underneath those very dense layers of sort of ground cover, and that's where they make their living.
Are we talking about this bird in shot now, Martin? If I scroll through,
what you want to look you can see 3
there
things.
We go. That
very young one there,
yeah.
And it's going right through that very brown phase. You look for a white eyebrow, a white moustache, and sergeant stripes on the wings. So on the shoulders.
Okay, so down at Tannum Sands, so getting
Tannum
down,
Sands. Wow,
so
right.
and bigger than a white-browed scrub wren. So would we think it's one of the other scrub wrens? Does the large build live up at Gladstone?
Is very rarely gets onto the ground though. Bottom around the ground.
I'm just going to bring it up because it's more.
It's a vine forager and in a more dense forest or in a wet forest. That would be bobbing around if it's a bit bigger, huh?
I mean, if it's a bit bigger, are you likely to see a pilot bird?
No.
No?
I'd rule out a quail thrush. They'd be right out of the scene.
What about one of my favourites? Although it's more, I mean, I used to see these guys on the ground. There we go. There's a photo of one on the ground.
Well,
the olive whistler.
Whistler not that far. They're more a southern group.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking of something that would be that may be bigger. That's why the size comes comes in, I mean, I
Well,
don't know.
grey shrike thrush get on the ground too, but the thing is, I don't know if you ever see 4 or 5, grey shrike thrush together on the ground, like that. They're more solitary.
And I'm thinking that Martin might know that grey shrike thrush, but let's
Yeah, I'm stumped on that. That's
because
like when often people say, "Oh, there's a bird that gets on my back fence, and I see it now and again," and it becomes very difficult to describe it.
yeah, I would have always called the grey shrike thrush a grey bird with some brown rather than a brown bird, but
Yeah, it's a great bird, brown.
yeah.
Yeah, but it's a bird that gets on the ground. But if this is a small brown bird on a trail, that describing. I mean, I'm flicking through a field guide here, just going, "What can it possibly be?"
Well, it's definitely something.
Yeah.
uh,
Never seen them take quail size, but different shape. Is it a shape like a little robin or a finch or a scrub wren? That might be a thing too. But
could it be a log runner in Gladstone?
if I'm thinking of Tannum Sands, I would doubt very much. They really like a forest where you've got a lot of dense leaves on the ground and that. And Tannum Sands, when I was last there, did not have a lot of that going on.
Yeah, I'm just looking for anything in that kind of
log runners. You're going to get in like a really lovely big wet forest with deep leaf litter and fallen logs. Actually, living up to their name. But
they're not really going to be seen. They're not really in that area anyway. I mean, that's got me a bit stumped.
I'm stumped on this.
Martin said it is very dense. Yeah, no, that was what surprised me looking there. But then again, I've said it a million times recently. Well, could it be? Martin, tell me. Yeah. I'm just going to ask the question, Ricki, because you're going the same way as I am. Would you say, Martin, that the foliage is sort of scallopy? Like could you mistake it for the love child of a red wattlebird and a blackbird? That's how I always like to think of the lovely Australian ground thrush, or as we now call it, the Bassian thrush.
Oh, I'm thinking russet-tailed thrush, but yeah, I don't know if they hang out in little groups together like that.
Well, maybe they're feeding offspring though.
That if that could be the case. But yeah, russet-tailed thrush get up pretty much that far.
I'm just pulling that up now. So this, and actually, this one, if you're not used to seeing it, you would definitely call it a brown bird rather than a grey bird.
But I usually expect to get them, in a bit of a forest, but
There we go. That's how I usually see them, and they're generally you look away and you lose them.
Yeah. Well, they take a couple of steps and then they freeze, and they.
That's
I was listening to a Bassian thrush calling in a beautiful big rainforest this morning, where I got rained upon very hard, but that's another story. But they really are the most beautiful singer, and we talk a lot about the most beautiful singer in Australia, and people will talk about butcher birds and various. That's the russet tail. That's not quite that exciting, but
I'm just wondering whether this helps Martin at all.
And people talk about grey shrike thrush, but the most beautiful scenery is a Bassian thrush.
And just for completeness, I will bring it up for you.
There's a slight chance you might get it there. I don't think they exist that far north.
So
very hard to split to look at.
So, Martin, this is the Bassian rather than the russet-tailed. Now that's the classic picture of where I would think is a cross between a red wattlebird and a blackbird.
Yeah, very much the blackbird shape, aren't they?
Yeah, and here's an indication of how well camouflaged they are on the leaf litter. That if you do look away, you can lose them in the background. So I might just have a look and see what the range map is. Yeah. Well, look at it.
Yeah.
They've been found up around Cairns, and then obviously the Sunshine Coast based on this. So that tells me that you could see them just as.
They definitely, yeah. Look, they're up around Fraser, as far north as Fraser Island and a little beyond. So yeah, they'd be a possibility too. So they're more the russet-tailed thrush. Russet-tailed thrushes,
I'm just going to have a look at the russet-tailed. Just going to have a look at the. It's certainly been recorded in Gladstone, based on this. So, yeah.
If it is substantially bigger than a white-browed scrub wren, and you're getting the modern brown, and it's a brown bird.
So, Martin, did any of those photos help you out, or the call? Had you heard them? So, yeah. Anyway, so Ricki, that rounds off this this round. Now Martin's going to do what he does, try and get a pick. Martin, if you happen to get a pick, and also if you happen to get if you can take a little video, if you hear it calling. Share it for the dawn chorus. I'll happily allow midday or afternoon, a midday or afternoon walk into the dawn chorus this month, which is actually happening on the 12th. So that's only next Wednesday. So yeah, check it out. And Martin, I've made it very easy. You can upload files now through the live page. Just go down to the Dawn Chorus section, the episode where I've got it coming up, and you can upload on there. So please do that. You can upload videos, you can upload audio files, you can upload pictures. That would be great. Ricki, I would just like to say thank you to those in the Riot Squad and the audience generally watching on. We've got Twitch, we've got YouTube, we had some Twitterers. I'm not watching Twitter, I'm sorry. If you are on Twitter and you like what we're doing, come over to one of the other platforms so you can come into the comments and be part of the conversation. And if you're listening on the podcast, thanks, we love it. Ricki, if someone, the question I was going to ask you about Capertree. I'm never ever going to stop saying Capertree. You know that now that I've typed it out once or twice in my life, I'll never forget it. That tour, that the people that you took, the birders that you took, were they locals or were they internationals? And did they have targets in mind?
All from Sydney.
Right.
One had done my bird watching course in the past. Two more were very much beginners, looking for a new experience. And one was someone who was more than a beginner, but sort of starting at early days still in his photography journey. And so he really wanted turquoise parrots. And turquoise parrots, we had kind of like a funny experience with. I have never dipped on turquoise parrots in going to the Capertree, but this time we did dip on them. And we went to one property when they were on another property. Basically, what we had, and what can you do?
But that's always the way when you
but he was very, very satisfied. We had a fantastic birding.
That's always the way you be talking to someone and they'll say, "Oh, you should have been here yesterday. There was a flock of them." So, anyway, that's bird watching. Now I've got up here where if you are interested in Ricki's bird watching course, aussiewild.com.au, and you can also pre-order Ricki's little brown birds of the Sydney region. There, well, actually, can they can pre-order, can't they? Or they just go on the waiting list?
You can sort of like your interest, and I'll put you on a list.
Yeah.
It will be tomorrow. I think that I will put a date down for my next Little Brown Birds work course. I'm shrinking that course from a 6-monther to a 4-monther, but keeping the 6 field trips and sort of combining some of the ebooks. So it's a course where you have been getting like 6 ebooks and 6 Zoom conferences and 6 tours. I'm scrunching it all down into 4 months because I think that helps people better with planning, because 6 months is a long ask to plan ahead, but 4 months and 4 ebooks and 4 Zoom things, but 6 tours, because everyone says they really get a lot out of those going out touring and getting, and it's not like a tour where I'm leading. People doing the course have to lead, and it's great. I want to hear all the mistakes, and I want to hear because mistakes is the learning process. So you have to come out and make those mistakes, make all the dumb calls, get all the things wrong, and yeah, this is the learning process. So I really encourage people to come out and really get it wrong, and have a great time doing it. And we all learn and discuss, and no one's the less for getting it wrong. And it doesn't matter who you are, and myself included. We'll go out in the bush, and one day we'll see something and go, "Oh, it's that," and then we'll go, "Oh, actually, it's not." And or we'll be puzzling over something. Something will get us, or we'll make a call that's a little bit premature, or it happens. So that's fine. And birding is a part of the joy of it is the learning experience. So yeah, that's cool. I have already put together, as I threatened to do on Twitter, a poster that's going to be available for Little Brown Birds of the Sydney region. I'm also going to make a Little Brown Birds of the Greater Melbourne region.
Excellent.
And probably a book will follow, because there's not that many chops and changes in it to achieve that.
That's right. So you can do Ricki's birdwatching course. You can go on one of the Sydney Royal National Park walks with Ricki, or you can book a specialised tour with Ricki through aussiewild.com.au, or you can just come back in a fortnight when we do another birdwatching deep dive, which may well include talking about my new binoculars, because I think they're going to arrive straight after Easter. So that could be fun.
Wow. Are we going to get a hint about what brand they are, what they are?
I can tell you that they are very definitely in the budget range for it's not something because of the way that, well, I've had a pair stolen. I've lent a pair to someone that I never got back. So just the nature of the way I live my life, I would not be investing substantial amounts of money in and for me it has to be lightweight, because my plan for the next couple of years includes traipsing around the place with an e-bike, or walking around places, and because I'm carrying audio gear as well and camera gear, I don't want heavy binoculars. So that gives you a clue. I'll show you when they arrive, and I'll do an unboxing That'll be fun.
All right.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much to the Riot Squad. Thanks, everyone, listening. If you're on the podcast, that's great. Make sure if you want to be part of the live show, thebirdemergency.com/live, and you can find everything that's coming up. I won't do the ad because we're running right out of time. Thanks again, Ricki.
Thank you. And thanks, everyone, for joining us for another deep dive. See you in a fortnight.
And please join into First Seen and Heard every morning. The first bird that you see and hear, hashtag First Seen and Heard on all the platforms. Ciao.
Bye for now.